Every day, local government makes modern life possible. Water flows, roads are repaired, parks and playgrounds open and come to life. And behind each one of those services is a story of people who show up, care deeply, and lead with purpose, even when no one is watching. This is the HaltingWinter podcast, and it's part of the HaltingWinter Project, a movement to restore pride, purpose, and participation in local government by sharing the stories that build belonging. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and every week I tell the stories that remind America where government really lives, locally, in our cities, our counties, and our communities. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to thank our founding sponsor, Tyler Technologies, a company that's been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998. From smarter budgeting to stronger resilience, Tyler Tech equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore practical resources and hear the real success stories from communities across the country at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. Tyler Technologies, empowering the public sector to build stronger, more connected communities. Now, let's turn to today's conversation. Today on the podcast, we're catching up with the newly installed ICMA President, City Manager of Coppell, Texas, and one of my favorite voices on organizational culture, the one, the only, Mike Land. Mike,
wow.
It is great. It's great to have you on the podcast.
To live up to, man. You set me up.
Well, you're doing it. You're living up to all of those things. And it's hard to believe it's been a year since I had you on the podcast, episode 125 in last December.
Yeah, it has flown by. Let me tell you, it has flown by.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of my favorite episodes. It's one of our most replayed episodes. And I think it's not only because you have a very fascinating story, a journey into city management, it's because you have incredible insights on organizational culture. I think some of the best. And not only your insights, but watching you. I think if people got to follow you on LinkedIn, it's a great follow to see what do you call it? The little the hamster or the what's it? It's from Good to Great.
Hedgehog.
The hedgehog, yeah.
It's not a hamster, it's a hedgehog.
The hedgehog.
Edgy. Yeah.
That's right, edgy. And so you got to follow Mike on LinkedIn. But before we get to the full interview, which we're going to replay here in a minute, our editors touched it up and made it to sound awesome. I want to catch up first on what's going on in Coppell in light of, I think as I've interviewed now, I think we've interviewed 150 city managers this year on the podcast. And over, we just hear the pressure, the drip down from the national level to the local. Because again, you guys have to deal with that. People aren't going to go, to DC and Congress and complain. They're going to go to City Hall and they're going to think that City Hall needs now Doge and they're going to be Doge. And so how are you dealing with these things? How are you intentionally fostering and sustaining? Because it's almost as much work to sustain a culture than it is to build it. How are you doing that in Coppell?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, for having me back on, and I appreciate the question. Yeah, let me blend a couple of things. As I've traveled as well, Seth, in my role as ICMA at the time as president-elect this past year, starting off as president, we were just in Alaska. We missed each other. Great people up there, extremely cold, but anyway, and what we hear and what I hear as I travel around, and then what I hear from my peers here and what we experience is, it is not so much the federal level, but I will say that there are many communities that are impacted by the funding mechanisms that are changing. So they're absolutely having to deal with extremely difficult conversations and how do they serve people in need and so forth. But at the state legislatures, they are the ones who are having the greatest impacts on the vast majority of the state members that I visit with as I travel, and in the state of Texas as well. And it's the ratcheting down and whether it's already been done or the threat of restricting revenues, restricting expenditures, putting caps in place. And in Texas in particular, we do not receive funding from the state. It's all locally generated. So it's even a different model than many other states. But to your point, in Coppell specifically, we have what we refer to as, call it the Austin Gap. And back in about 2017, 18, the state of Texas passed some legislation that restricted growth of property taxes. And I understand, we all understand why. But I was able to model back then what it looked like we were going to be able to attract from or retain from property taxes. And we ran through that exercise last year with the council again. And I was pretty darn close to what we had predicted was going to happen with property taxes. Pretty simple math because it's a formula that just uses. But, we've also been held, if you remember, I mentioned about the sales tax, potential changes to sales tax. And so that still hasn't come through yet, but we live under that particular threat. To the specific point about how we handle it here is we have engaged the entire organization on how to solve what we call the Austin gap. But we identified between 2020 this year and 2030 that if we did not do anything, we would have an $8 million gap in funding by 2030. And so we have started already making some reductions in the number of personnel that we have, while still doing our best to maintain the services that are expected out of our community. That's the lens we run everything through. As far as you talk about our culture, we run everything through our culture. And as part of our culture, involving and engaging with all the way down to the frontline folks to help solve this gap. So with the efforts that we took this year and some of the reductions, we've reduced that gap from roughly $8 million to, let's just say, about $6 million. Still got to get there. It gets harder and harder every year to do that. But it is through the lens of, we have permission, we have horsepower. Are the decisions being made in accordance with the three anchors? Our competencies, how we behave, how we talk, the language that we use. We are extremely consistent, even as we're going through a very crucial conversation. We even talked about crucial conversation. And, this year our arc in our book studies is about decision making. And so we'll be doing, think fast and slow and decision making with Heath and some others that we'll take our leadership team through so that it helps them frame how to make the best decision based on the best available information. What are the right questions to ask? As you know, that is as critical, if not more, than anything else. So that was a kind of a long way around to answer that question, but I would say we're going to do it, and we have been successful so far in doing it by making sure that we are engaging everyone. This is not a top-down; it's actually a bottom-up solution, and when you're talking about those kind of reductions in spending.
I think it's so important, and maybe we'll just dive in for just a moment, because I think this is where it gets practical for people. In a growing organization, how do you stay connected to the front lines? I think that's the danger of any kind of leadership, is you get more disconnected and you think that, that's what we do. We're known for, having the brilliant ideas. And I think some of the best ideas come from the front line of the people who actually have to make it happen, and they get kind of tuned out and feel disregarded. So how are you doing that?
Yeah, well, recalling, I think I talked about this a little bit. One of the best, well, first of all, I'm a chief reminding officer, right? Or chief, hey, this is the message that we're working on. I talked about our 6 questions. And by the way, for 2026, between now and the summer, taking care of the Austin gap is what's important right now, and who's responsible for it. We say leadership team leading the leadership team. So we hold these leadership summits every quarter. And so that gets us to about, we're roughly about 400 plus or minus employees. That leadership quarterly meeting has close to 70 plus to 80 of our supervisors, leaders, people leaders, which is all the way to the frontline supervisors. That's how we stay connected, because we make sure that the message is consistent and we don't walk out of that room without having the clarity around what we mean by the words that we say. And I'll give you a prime example of that. We are talking about what does effective mean and what does efficient mean, because we want to make sure that we're efficient, but more importantly, we want to make sure we're effective. And so we're going to be efficient by using data that produces quality results that our community desires. So that's how we know we're being effective. And we have measurements that are being put in place that allow us to see how well we're doing along that journey.
I love what you just said. And I just want to reinforce that you get everyone together, and it's not enough for just leadership to to say words. It's to make sure that people all understand and can articulate back what has been described, because that's the problem with words. Everyone can nod their head and then leave and say different things about what they interpreted. So making sure that you allow people in a room to articulate back, what do you think has been said? Are we on the same page, to reinforce that? So important, especially in a growing organization. Well, I want to be mindful of time because we want to get to your episode. Tell us about the ICMA. I'm really excited about, we've got Julia, we got new executive director. You're now the president. We got Andy. In fact, we're going to have Andy Peterson as the next podcast episode after yours, full-length interview. Now as the president-elect, your position that you were in last year. Tell us about what's exciting about the ICMA. Obviously, we're looking forward to Long Beach. We just got Tampa. Talk about living in the sun, especially after I spent in Alaska. What's exciting about ICMA? How can we get people excited to be a part of it? And what does being a part of it look like? How can they benefit from their membership in the year ahead?
So let me begin with, first of all, you need to also interview Tanya Angie, who is now the past president, because she is not a has-been. Tanya is great, and she would really enjoy being on your podcast as well. One of the things that we're going to be concentrating on, and it's interesting you asked the word about excitement, is it's actually about making sure we're grounded. And so making sure we're connecting to our members. So if you talk to Andy, this past year we did a lot of traveling. I just finished my credentialing report, and I counted, and it's not about the glory or the joy of traveling and everything like that, but I think I visited 14 different agencies or states or conferences in 2025, and I think I've got about 13 or 14 in 2026. I say that because the first responsibility we have to our members is to connect to our members. And the way that we do that is by having a relationship so that we can listen and then take back and then be able to potentially implement some of the things that our members are saying that they want. So this year, our local government reimagined conferences are about AI and about democracy. So two topics that are front of mind. We have days with ICMA planned. Those are brand new, so that there's just time. Here's what's going on with ICMA. Here's what we're doing in research. Here's some of the activities that benefit you directly. So those are going to be great opportunities. Then we have a couple of meetings with credentialing. So folks that are credentialed, there's going to be special time that they can just come together with their other peers who are credentialed and be able to spend their time together. And of course, we have the conference that's going to be happening in Long Beach. Along the way, we have the Constitution was just amended by our members. And so going into 26, 27, we'll have newly identified regions. We'll have new processes for people to be able to serve on the board. And it just the whole idea with Julia on board and the programs and the focus on services and making sure that we are meeting the needs of our members. And I call it, the first thing is with ICMA, it's an opportunity for rejuvenation. It's an opportunity for creating those relationships. And it's an opportunity for kind of basically like renewing themselves. So there's a respite, right? By being together with other members to, as you said, over the course of the year, hearing those pressure points and knowing that they are not alone. One of the things that Seth, that I picked up on in Alaska a couple of weeks ago, and you may have as well, is a huge state. They reminded me if they split it in half, Texas would still be the third largest state. So that's how big Alaska is. But more importantly was the fact that, you had these small communities, 300, 400, 500 people in the middle of literally nowhere with no roads. And, only being able to access by way of those small planes, 100 days out of the year, no electricity other than what's by the generator. The cost of living is so extremely high, and they're struggling with the same things that our members in, urbanized areas or other rural areas, but they're so isolated. And so, I think the important thing for us to remember when we come together is we are not alone. We are together in this. And I said it, I believe, we talk about this calling. I think it's a calling of love. It's not, it's just something that there's no way other to describe it. Who would choose a profession like this, right? Where there's 24/7 Monday morning quarterbacks every day, 365 days a year, right? And some people, unfortunately, their communities live in Facebook. And some people have people showing up at council meetings that are just, expressing whatever view that they have. And then you have councils, we see it all the time. Some are disruptive and, not connected, and others are just humming, So we have that all over the country, all over the globe. And ICMA can be that place where I can find that refuge. I can find that respite. I can be renewed. I can learn. I can talk to other members, and I can find out, you know what? I am not by myself. I've got somebody that I can call on. And I think that's the real value of ICMA and what it does and what it can do, working with other affiliates, working with our state associations, and really just doing everything we can to support our members. So that's my preach for the day.
I love it. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the associations. I spent last year speaking in a number of the state associations for city managers, as well as some of the others for city clerks, et cetera. And I just think people need to feel that they're not alone. And, I always say a city manager and a pastor have a lot of similarities. It's a role that doesn't shut off. It's a role that deeply cares for people and their lives and their well-being. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And I think the reality is, and it's even harder for a city manager because in every given city in America, there's churches on every corner, right? And so you can go to a pastor's luncheon or something and connect with others who get it. In a city, you're the only city manager. There's not another. And so it can be very alone. You have to be very intentional then to get together. And especially, and it doesn't even take you being in Alaska. In Texas, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are in towns and places that it's miles. It's a half an hour to get to somewhere, another city manager.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think that's where we remember these associations are important. And you might be listening going, I don't know. I don't have time. You're making all the excuses. And I'm just telling you, you trust me. Now is the time, I think, to be a part, because I'm excited about the direction. I'm excited about just knowing you and Andy, and I can't wait to get to know Julia. She's got to come on the podcast. She just seems awesome. And so it's just like, it's fresh, it's new, be a part. And I think that's the thing. It's just like we want our local, our residents to be a part of committees and to be a part. And we always complain, no one wants to vote, no one wants to be a part. Well, it's the same thing for associations. Go be a part and be a change agent. Oh, so good, Mike. Anything else before we turn it over to your episode?
No, I always do that. People ask a question, then you say no, and then you go on and start talking. It's a weird thing. I don't know why I do that. My wife reminds me of that on a regular basis, by the way. Now, first of all, Seth, I appreciate you being a champion for the association. And secondly, our members are awesome, and they are. When I'm in the room, there are a lot of smarter people than me, and there's a lot to learn from those folks. And I am just so appreciative of the service that they provide, of the care that they provide for their own team and for their community. And I just want to remind them too that self-care is extremely important, because before they can go care for someone else, they've got to have the self-care for them and their immediate family. And it's just a reminder to take a pause, take a breath, take that time to renew. And I'm a huge advocate for sabbaticals. And so if you can take some time away, I shouldn't say it that way. You need to take some time away. You need to have a conversation with your council. And I'm not talking about a week-long sabbatical. That does not count. Taking some real time, get away, disconnect from this for the entire time that you're away, and just kind of clear your head, all right, and get right. So anyway, those are my words of encouragement. So thank you, Seth.
I love it. In fact, that's the two keynotes I'm giving right at the beginning of the year, going out to the Illinois City Management Association and Wisconsin. I'm doing Balance is BS and the Strategic Pause, which is really a cry for sabbaticals, and why I think it's vital for city managers. So, there it is. Well, here's your episode, one of my favorites, filled with inspiration and insights, episode 125 with Mike Land. It's titled Culture by Choice. We're living through one of the biggest shifts local government has ever seen. Not political, not cultural, it's digital. AI, automation, cybersecurity, cloud migration, none of this used to be part of your job description. But now it's the choppy water every city and county is swimming in. And for many leaders, it feels less like innovation and more like what's going to break next And will we survive it? Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. A lot of governments aren't afraid of the cloud. They're afraid of getting it wrong. Because the stakes are real. You're trying to protect data, modernize ancient systems, improve service, and keep your residents happy, all while staying under budget and out of the fire. That's why I appreciate the team at Tyler Technologies. They don't talk about the cloud like it's magic pixie dust. They break it down. What to migrate, when to migrate, how to get long-term value without blowing your budget or burning out your people. They've helped more local governments make this transition than anyone I know, and they've put all their best insights into a new ebook about cloud adoption and strategy. If you're trying to lead your organization into the future instead of getting dragged there, you got to check this out. Their newest guide is called Modern Governments Live in the Cloud, and you can download it for free at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter, WINTER. tylertech.com/winter. Go check it out. Download the free guide. Now, back to the conversation. Mike, what a pleasure it is to have you with us today. I look forward to hearing your story.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so let's do as we always do. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up in the home that produced the man that's before us today.
I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. Attended school there in Houston, and eventually went on to attend Texas A&M University. Quick story, my mom and dad, neither one were college material, and they did not go on to college. My dad was a bread man for Miss Barrett's Bakery for 40 years, and we lived 3 houses down from the bakery, and I was known as Baby Land for all those years growing up, going into the bakery. And then I, too, during my high school years, worked for Miss Baird's during summer jobs and winter holidays. And so that was my exposure. My mom was basically, back in the day, it's called a secretary. And so she worked in the oil and gas industry for most of her career as a secretary for companies like Fluor. When I went on to Texas A&M University, I was a trainer for football. And so I was there from 79 to 83 when Coach Tom Wilson was there, and then Jackie Sherrill was hired. So those were my college years through A&M. And I thought I was going to be a coach, is what I was starting to study, and made some observations about myself and some of the things that were important to me, and ended up getting my undergraduate degree in environmental design, which is basically pre-architecture. A&M, it was a 4-year program. So I would have to go on to get my master's if I wanted to pursue architecture. Again, through a series of observations about myself, I got into a program called the Master of Science of Land Development. Now, they did not create that degree for me. It was just happened to be the name. So I actually tease people and say, yes, I have a BED degree, a Bachelor's of Environmental Design, and a MSLED degree, MSLD, because I graduated in 85, and in Texas, there were no jobs in real estate to be had with the oil and gas crash and the real estate crash. And so my wife and I moved out to Florida, Sarasota. We had our first child. So I was moving my wife with basically a 1-year-old out to Florida, where we didn't know anybody, working in Sarasota in the private sector, and worked for a land planning firm that specialized in large developments, rezonings, and those types of things. And when that firm decided to close down, I went to work for another company, Wiles Daily Ponsky. And that firm, while it did zoning, land use planning, and so forth, it really specialized in eminent domain work, expert testimony. And so I was trained, if you will, from a statistics side and data side and doing research and that type of thing. As I worked in Florida, we moved over to Orlando, the Orlando area. I thought, when I was working for the company in Sarasota, I served as the chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force that the county had set up. And one of the interesting things about Florida at that time was called 9J5. It was very legalistic in its approach to growth, talking about levels of service and things having to be in place and infrastructure and so forth. So I wanted to sit on the other side of the table, see what that was like. So I became the planning community development director in Tavares, Florida, which was the county seat in Lake County. My daughter came home from kindergarten, I think it is. My wife does, she tells me I tell the story incorrectly, but she came home one day and so here's a little 6-year-old. She says she wanted to be a Florida Gator. And we were like, no, we're going back to Texas. And so, because my wife and I both graduated from Texas A&M University. So we moved back to Texas in 92, I believe. At the time in between there, Lisa, we had our middle child. I moved her from Sarasota to Orlando right at the same time that Michelle was born. And then when Lauren was born, we moved to Texas. So there was this thing about moving and with our children, and my wife was a real trooper to go through all that. So I went to work in Gainesville, Texas, north of the Dallas Metroplex, as the community development director. And then I had an opportunity to become executive director of something called Southwestern Diabetic Foundation, which was working with kids with diabetes, Camp Sweeney. So I was in fundraising, fund development, managing, if you will, volunteers and leading an organization. So that was quite an experience. I had never had that experience before. And then some things happened in Gainesville, Texas, that the city council came to me and asked me if I would be interested in becoming the city manager. So I became the city manager in December of 1996. I served in that capacity for a little over right at 10 years. And then became the town manager in a growing community called Prosper, Texas. At the time when I got to Prosper, it was a little less than 6,000 left, and it was about a little less than 13,000. Just to put that in perspective, it's over 40,000 now. And so a lot of the work we were doing then was setting the community up for growth. And then in 2012, I came over to the city of Coppell as a deputy city manager. Had different departments reporting to me. The city manager retired, Clay Phillips, whose name you'll hear about a little bit more later. Clay retired in 2017, and I became city manager, and I've been serving that capacity since April of 2017.
There it is. There is the whirlwind story. I love it. Okay, we gotta back up a little bit. Okay. Let's go back to the very beginning with the bakery. So this is fascinating to me because I'm a little bit familiar with baker hours. And okay. Right now, was your dad working? Like, was he baking? Was he?
No. My dad, he was a bread man. He was a delivery, right? Oh, so he's getting up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and delivering fresh bread every day to the department stores and small stores throughout the city of Houston on his routes. I used to go right out on his routes. They would call also, we would go out on hot shots when various stores or whatever would run out of bread. We'd have to run out there and take the bread with them. And then I worked in the surplus store during the summers, relieving the folks who worked in the various stores that were around the urban area. So here's a 16-year-old kid running these little individual surplus stores, right? And then I did there was hard work in definitely loading trucks. If you remember the old box trucks that the bread companies used, and those racks, and I can count them in my head, the way that it worked. And so anyway, he worked there for 40 years and retired. And like I said, I just worked there during the holidays, and I just remember great people, having a lot of fun, but a lot of hard work. So it was a good experience.
I wonder if, like you just said, all those racks and the getting the bread, maybe that's the initial push to architecture, right? You're gonna make everything fit in the grid.
Well, I would tell you that on the push to architecture had to do with the fact that I lived in the shadows of downtown Houston. And so if you think about the 60s and 70s, that what was happening, there was a lot of growth in Houston at that time. A lot of the skyscrapers were going up, and Houston was known for not having zoning. I didn't know that as a kid, right? I didn't know that until I got away to school. And I'm a small person, if you will, thin, and was not athletic. As a matter of fact, that's how I got into training, because I was terrible at being an athlete. But I enjoyed being around the coaches and the rest of the guys in terms of the team sports and so forth. And that's one of the things as you talk about that influences the coaching and the mentoring, and watching how the coaches operated, seeing how the team functions, the team works together. Um, being raised in the community, being in the shadows of downtown and seeing the skyscrapers and everything along those lines. So I had this design interest from a young age. I remember as a kid designing amusement parks just on my own, just taking paper and drawing. I used to design models, even submitted them to Mattel in terms of the ways cars, because if you remember those little cars, the Mattel Hot Wheels and all the different designs that they had. So I was doing all those kind of things when I was a young man and a kid, and then getting the opportunity to go to Texas A&M, become a trainer for a football team, and being around some really stellar athletes and some great men that were coaches. I had the opportunity to work on the defensive end, which is where Coach R.C. Slocum was. And R.C. Slocum, Coach Slocum, is still associated with Texas A&M University. So, so I got to see some really cool things and meet some really neat people.
It seems like there's a level of self-awareness. Like we can be inundated with the sports world. Oh, we all want to be right. That's kind of the dream of every young boy, is we want to be a professional athlete. But to recognize that, man, I do not have the skills. I do not have the whatever it is, right? It's kind of, there's only one Spud Webb who has the audacity to push himself into the NBA. But it's kind of like, but instead of going, oh, okay, well, I'm going to swing the pendulum, which probably happens usually. It's like, well, I'm not fit for this, so I'm going to swing the pendulum into something entirely different. You stay and go into training, coaching. Talk about that, and you even have said that in kind of the choices you made going into your career. This just seems to be a self-awareness where you're really asking yourself, okay, who am I? What am I actually skilled at? What am I actually passionate about? And it seems like you have also no kind of hesitation to go, this isn't really what I want to do. Let's go here, right? Which I think is really with young people sometimes, and I know this because it's my story, we can get so influenced by not even real influence. It's almost assumptions. We create assumptions about what people expectations, like, oh, I need to be this to make these people happy. And then we won't make those changes to actually lead us to more purpose and more fulfillment. Talk about that as you were kind of coming up into the coaching training.
Sure. So the awareness, I think, is a valid point, because that's something extremely important to me in terms of when I work with other folks today. I couldn't have told you. I wouldn't have said that I was a very goal-oriented kid. I don't know that my parents really talked to me about goals. So they just allowed me to explore, right, in terms of what's going on. So I did baseball, basketball, track, and I really wasn't very good at any of them. And, and I had very empathetic coaches who didn't discourage me. Let's say that, right? In terms of what's going on. And somewhere along the way, and I don't know where I picked this up from, but somewhere along the way, persistence became part of my ethos. I remember in sixth grade, I was running doing a track meet, long distance, because I wasn't a sprinter. And so the coaches just put you in, it's like, let's put you in long distance. And it was kind of one of the few times I think my dad actually came out to a track meet, and I not only did I finish last, I think I finished a half a lap behind everybody else, so much so that they had to hold up the next race to allow me to finish. Now, I could have, and I probably was, as a sixth grader, extremely embarrassed by that. But one of the things my dad did say to me afterwards that stuck with me is that he was proud of me for not quitting. And that stuck with me. I have no idea why I finished that race. I really don't, because it was embarrassing to be that far behind and everything along those lines. But I do remember that from my dad, and going forward, persistence has always been something that has been with me. Also, another thing, being slow, patience is something that's been with me a lot. And I tease my wife, and I say, I used to pray for patience a lot. So then I got married and had 3 daughters. So patience, God has a way of rewarding those prayers.
That's right. That's right.
So anyway, the bottom line is, as I was going through those experiences, I didn't know how they were adding up to lead me to what I do now. because it was never on my radar to become a city manager.
And that's what's interesting about kind of where you go, right? You have these, which really we're going to dive into with what you are doing in your city with things like the Cornerstone Project and the 3 anchors. But it's interesting to look. That's why I love looking back this reality of coaching. I mean, obviously that has had a huge impact in how you lead as a city manager now, but those experiences of being on those teams, understanding really what it means. I mean, talk maybe a little bit about that, especially with athletes. There's so much with coaching that's in the mind, right? We think about the physical specimen of these professional and even college athletes, right? Just another level of physical reality. But there's so much that can keep even the most talented physical person, they can get stuck in between the years and not be as impactful. And so coaching and training and working through some of those aspects too.
Yeah. Recently, Nick Saban's been on ESPN, and one of his recent conversations really resonated with me, because you hear process and people kind of think, oh yeah, process and everything like that. But the thing with going through in all sports that I was associated with, it was clear those athletes who had the discipline and the mindset to keep pressing forward, and then the discipline to put in the work, were more successful. I'm not going to tell you that, necessarily they're all great athletes. I'm not saying that. But the heart and the discipline, that those were the ones that the coaches acknowledged and would always kind of gravitate to, right? In terms of that inner motivation. If a coach, this is just an observation, if the motivation has to come from the coach, then it's not going to be true. The coach, if he can figure, or he or she can figure out, what the needs are of that particular individual, and then how do you meet the needs of that individual with the understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, I found that those coaches were much more successful.
Well, let's just jump into that, because again, we're going to talk about what you've just done. We'll talk about the culture before you got there and what it's been. I just talked with Brooks Williams, who's over in Ferris, Texas. And he said when he came in, the culture was horrible. I mean, it was people were asking, why are you even taking this job, and putting bets on how long he'd last. And he's done a real 180 on the culture there. But when you talk about culture and you talk about that motivation, I mean, it just seems like social media right now is filled with the motivational quotes and everyone's kind of looking outside of themselves to find it. And I totally agree with you, is there can be some help in that, but if you have to go to a well outside of yourself for continual motivation, you're going to have a really hard time, I think, getting your life off the runway. It kind of, as I say, is a plane analogy. Talk about that. How do you help people find an internal motivation instead of always relying on you or new kind of stuff?
I'm 64 years old. And as someone said, I made a lot of mistakes in my life in terms of, and hopefully I've learned from them, right? What I find, and this is true to who I am, because I believe I'm in service to others, right? And so knowing who you are first allows me then now, Seth, to have this conversation with you. Right. And so the idea is, and the interest is, tell me more about you. Tell me how you got into what you got to be. Tell me what's important to you. Tell me what's going on with your family. Because as I listen and just ask questions, we become connected. And once we become connected with the understanding of what we are trying to accomplish together, it opens so many doors for possibilities. When things aren't going well, knowing full well there may be struggles that are happening, then by having that connection, the person that's across from me absolutely knows I have their back no matter what, right? Much like this, you're getting your business started and you're putting out this podcast, and I don't normally say yes to these kinds of things, but okay, I kind of see your background. I see what's going on, what you're trying to build and everything like that. It's like, okay, here's something that I can support. But if you notice, when we first got started, it was like, tell me more about you. And so my initial connection to you is this idea of, you were in ministry So you were in service to others. So there's an immediate connection. My belief in service to others, your belief in service to others. Then how do we mesh those together so that we can build on something so that you can be successful in building what you're trying to do? If I can support that, that's how I approach things.
You said something too at the beginning of that, how again, you're really finding purpose in yourself, right? You're finding things in your life that you're, again, passionate about, or you're kind of like your why, right?
Right.
And I find, maybe speak to this, because we're talking about what you've done culturally in City Hall, but sometimes I worry that everyone is so pushed, especially as Americans, to find all of their identity in their work, in their profession, instead of being able to go, hey, I have all these other aspects of my life. I've got relationships, and I've got my person, and I wonder if that's how, like, again, it's taking the time to know someone fully so that we can find their motivations. Like, I think it's a great thing to maybe not find all of your identity in the corporate ladder or whatever position and role. I've got to become a municipal leader. It's like,
right.
No, you can be whatever you want, because maybe your goal is just to make money to be able to provide for your family or the ones you love. How do you?
Yeah, it's interesting on the latter point that you said. I've said this over and over again. I see from a material standpoint, everything that goes on around there. I can say that I have never pursued the monetary rewards first. I looked for what is a place where I think that my background and my awareness and the things that I believe in can make a difference and provide influence so that someone's life is made better. Now, I can't force that on anyone, but I can surely facilitate, in this case, organizations, and I can inform councils, and I can offer suggestions as far as how do we make something better. I will give you an example. When I was in Gainesville, working class community, one of the things that we did is we started going into people's homes and asking them to invite some of their neighbors over and just tell us, what did you need to have happen in your particular block? Not even the whole city, but in your particular block, so that you feel safe, so that you feel that you can have your family grow here and do, that type of thing. And I would bring in some other team members and we would hear, and I know this is going to sound simple. Sometimes it was simple as, if that street light would just finally be fixed, right? In terms of what's going on, or that sidewalk, or there's some code compliance issues, or, I'm having trouble doing these kind of things. But it was having a one-on-one conversation. So to your point, the same way with the organization, am I having one-on-one conversation with my team members? So I can really find out what's going on with them, because look, they spend their waking hours predominantly with us. So how do I create an environment that brings joy to what they do in very hard circumstances? That's my driver.
And there's so much we can go into. I do want to hit real fast before we really dive into what you're doing at your city now. I want to go back. Community development director. That's kind of when you go in from private sector into public, right?
Right.
Back when you move to Gainesville, Texas, you become the interim city manager there for a short period of time, and then you go and become the director of the Southwestern Diabetic, and then come back as the full city manager. Talk about that interim city manager. I'm always fascinated because I reach out to thousands of city managers weekly through emails and connections,
right.
and I see so many, again, in a position where there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of people in that interim city manager position. What was that position like? And then what was it like to come back later as the actual city manager? That seems like a wild story.
Yeah. Well, so when Lyle Drescher left to become city manager in another community in the Metroplex, growing community, the council named me as interim. Basically, as community development director, I was also functioning as an assistant city manager. We couldn't have the title, just in the small community. And so I was familiar, because of the different things that I was doing, with a lot of the organization. My conversation with the council at the time was, okay, as interim,
I see where the things that we're trying to do and trying to accomplish, and you want me to keep moving those things forward. Or are we, I basically had a conversation. What am I a caretaker, or am I still doing things right? And the council at the time said, no, we still want you to be bringing things to us and, moving things forward. Went through the interview process. I was, let's see, I was probably at the time 33. I'm trying to think when that was, 95, 30, somewhere 33, 34, 35. Never, again, I didn't have my MPA and all this kind of good stuff. I just worked for a municipality for a few years. And so I didn't know here from Sikkim, right? In terms of just learning the process. Went through the interview process. They selected another person to become city manager who had an engineering background, which, okay. And at the time, the chairman of the Southwestern Diabetic Foundation, who was also chairman of bank there locally, came to me and said, hey, we'd like for you to serve in this capacity. And so it's like, okay, well, they're bringing in a new guy. I'm okay with, going ahead and giving this Southwestern Diabetic Foundation. Never been in development either, right? Raising funds. So it was a new experience, and I was willing to take it on. We did some really cool things, and Camp Sweeney's a great facility and great people working there, still is to this day. The things just didn't work out with that particular city manager, so the council approached me. And, this is something I call when some of my friends become city managers. I remember that first day. The first phone call I got was somebody out of Dallas upset because we stopped them from duck hunting on our lake and I mean, that literally was in the first 30 minutes. And it's like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I can tell you that there are residences all around that lake. And so I'm sure there's probably a valid reason why we don't want you duck hunting around that particular lake. But anyway, so the dive in, the folks knew me. They knew what my work ethic was. The council knew me as well. And so I guess I was a known commodity, and therefore that transition was actually pretty seamless. Gainesville's located about an hour north of Dallas. It was a community of about 12 to 13,000 at the time. And it's the county seat. And so for the next, 10 years, when I left, there was a lot of outpouring of love and everything. One of the things I said to them, they helped me raise my family because of my three girls. I, as I said, I had three girls. So it was a great experience, and it was a full service city. We did it all. Water, sewer, trash, fire, police, the whole ball of wax. We were, standalone on our own kind of situation. We went through multiple tornadoes, multiple floods, different kinds of things. So there was all kinds of experiences happening, and it was just great to be there. And we got to do some pretty cool things. So it was a good experience.
You're in Gainesville for 10 years, which is a really good, to start in your first city manager position and stay a decade is, seems to be unlikely what I see. So you're there for 10, you go to Prosper for 5, you're the DCM in Coppell for 5, and then you've been now the city manager for 7.5 years, I think.
Yeah, right.
So,
yes.
So that's a great tenure in the top chair. And so I want to dive into the Cornerstone Project, because that's how I first, I think, was connected to you. I saw a post on LinkedIn about this strategic plan, but it wasn't for the city. It's kind of, normal strategic plan. It was a culture plan. And I thought, whoa, this is interesting. This is unique. I haven't really seen this in municipal world so far. My passion is culture. I believe culture changes everything. And it's one thing I think is most lacking in the municipal world is really healthy cultures that make people show up. And, something's wrong with the stereotype. What was the movie Zootopia? I don't know if you saw Zootopia.
Yes.
And there's
the sloth,
the sloth, the DMV. And everyone looked at that and was like, yes, we all, right. But no one wants to think, I would imagine in the city world, no one wants, we get it, but no one wants to think that's me. That's us. Right. That's our city. Right. And so, well, what does it say though? So I want to get into this culture thing, but what did that look like over, a 27.5 year career in city management? What's taken you to where you're at today? What are some of the lessons that you've been able to see that help shape now the work with the Cornerstone Project?
Sure. From a culture standpoint, it's either culture by chance or a culture by choice, right? And I would say throughout the profession that our profession believes in and does work towards culture by choice. Um, I believe that to be universal. And that's one of the things that, ICMA, and we talked a little bit about that prior to getting on the podcast, is supportive of. The idea that you have to be purposeful, and I'm going to go back to you also have to be disciplined throughout that process. And you also have to be willing to understand that not everyone is going to be on board with the culture that you're choosing to go forward with. And in those instances, it's okay. And you do have the conversations that need to be had to say, may not necessarily be the right fit for what we're trying to accomplish here, or your talents may be better used somewhere else. Or they will self-identify and choose to leave on their own. But you've got to be prepared to have those conversations. If you don't mind, I'll just kind of go into a little bit about Coppell. What's kind of I don't know if people will find it funny or not, but it's kind of interesting. When I moved to Gainesville in 1992, we rented a house. And so the house we rented, the landlord lived in Coppell, Texas. And there were a couple of times that I wanted to make sure that my rent check was not late. So I would drive into Coppell, Texas back in the early 90s. And the community back then was just taking off. Matter of fact, I remember driving by City Hall at the time, and there was nothing but pasture all around it, right, in terms of what's going on. Then in the late 90s, I got attended to attend something similar to what you do, Seth, a small conference of city managers that this particular consultant had been working with. And Coppell did a presentation. Jim Witt was the city manager. Clay Phillips was the deputy city manager. And they brought some of their department heads, and they were talking about their culture journey. Because back in the mid 90s, when they were growing so fast, it was just taking care of business. And Jim Witt and Clay together knew that they had to be more purposeful in their culture journey. So working with this particular consultant, they started with the basic of Covey's, 7 habits, talking about personal leadership, and then just started building from there. If you think about it, from the late 90s all the way till today, our culture is something that gets talked about on a daily basis from a leadership team standpoint. Our behaviors are built into that cornerstone that you're talking about of expectations. And so while you have performance and skills and those types of things, you also have your core competencies. And one of those in core competencies is human, and the human competency. And that's where our behaviors are laid out. So just because you may be technically proficient and great at your job, but if you're terrible with people, you are not going to survive in this organization. And we will work with you to identify how our expectations are related to what you do. But at the end of the day, that's your personal choice. And we have had, times when people have needed to leave because of their behavior, not because they weren't technically proficient, but because of their behavior. So hopefully that gives you a little background.
I think that's what actually one of the things that stood out to me is behaviors. I worked with Donald Miller and the Story Brand team, Business Made Simple. And that's one of the things we work with businesses is a lot of you think culture is just about having a compelling mission. But we say that it starts with the mission. People need to know what they're rowing towards and row together. But then you have to go into key behaviors and actions. And if you don't hold people accountable to their behaviors, they can get to your mission in some really poor ways.
Right.
And so talk about that. That's, again, I think very unique that we would actually hold people accountable to their behaviors, not just their actions, specifically in a municipal concept.
So I'm going to combine a little bit. You talked a little bit about from a strategy standpoint as the team was developing and the team was being, so you had Covey's 7 habits, then you had Collins, Good to Great. And that's when the hedgehog was developed. And so, it's on my LinkedIn, my communication folks have come up with a little cute hedgehog. So apparently that's my I don't know what the right word to use is, but anyway, so I've got the little hedgie that's showing up, representing our building community through public service. That's our hedgehog, right? And then we talk about the flywheel. We use a lot of common terms that Collins uses, and I think I mentioned to you before, we are big into Patrick Lencioni in terms of how we move forward. The advantage was a real game changer for us as far as our 6 questions. That's where the 3 anchors came from. And then what we've done is we've just continued to build. But one of the things we're really careful of, we purposely don't introduce new concepts on a just this constant basis. We just like to build and layer on top of what we're already doing, keeping the message as simple as possible. That's why the 3 anchors exist. Having our 6 questions in place, we go over those every 6 months in terms of if they need to be updated, given what's happening. We adopted something I think that you're referring to as Coppell's core competencies, the 4 C's. And in that, it lays out not only our core competencies, but our behaviors, our code of conduct, if you will. It lays out our ideals as far as an organization is concerned. And so when we bring a new employee, a new team member on board, time is spent in that. And then we have, I'm probably jumping ahead, Seth, so I apologize. But we have quarterly where we're doing book studies, and then we do follow up with actions resulting from the book studies. For example, we just had a book study on upstream. And this coming Wednesday, we'll be doing a series of questions around upstream as it relates to Dan Heath's book. Anyway, so it's just constant. Some folks call it the chief reminding officer. The idea that the employees hear from me, the team members hear from me on a regular basis about what are we striving to do and how we're going to do it, how are our expectations. We are not afraid to talk about our behaviors. We are not afraid to talk about our expectations. And when people don't meet them, the other side of that is we don't, we're not a punitive organization at all from that standpoint. We do hold people accountable. But we always ask, what do you learn? What did you learn from this experience, right? Not everything. Look, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. It's okay. In those mistakes, what did we learn and how do we get better?
I think a lot of people are afraid of hard conversations and anything, like you say, that seems punitive. And so in all kinds of I was a part of nonprofits in the church, a pastor for over a decade, lead pastor. And man, it seems like in the church, you can never fire anyone because it's just so right. Oh gosh, like this is, horrible. But it's actually loving to people to get them out of a seat that's not actually healthy for them. How do we get, whether that's a different seat in the organization or whether that's a different organization entirely? And so I think if you do it, if you lead out of real genuine care, it helps you have those hard conversations. Not having those hard conversations actually isn't caring for the person, and it's not caring for the organization.
Yeah, we have great folks that work for the organization. Sometimes they're not ready for the proverbial promotion, right? And so I've even as I've hired new directors, there have been folks internally that have been interested, and I've gone to them and I said, "You're not ready. It's not time. Here's the kinds of things that we need from you, and that here's the areas of opportunity to help get you ready, and our job is to help get you ready so you can compete." Those are hard conversations to have with people because, they've been planning their whole career to be this chief or this director or that type of thing. It's just as important to have those conversations with those folks as anything else, right? The other thing that we've done is we'll have small groups that I will personally mentor, just knowing that they may have an interest to become a director or they want to promote into an assistant director's position. Others that may have an interest in becoming a city manager, we have conversations with those as well, right? Because the path in our organization is not fast. Let's put it that way, because we have some long tenured city directors now. Around my table, when I was hired in 2017, There are basically only 2 directors out of the 9 that are still, here now. And it's because of retirements. Majority of them, they had been with the organization for so long, meaning 25 to 30 years, that kind of length. And, we had 1 or so that may not have been the right fit. But, how do we make ourselves better? That's what we try to do. What are we bringing to the table? How do we make ourselves better? How does this person challenge us? So when we use the word fit, it isn't necessarily about, putting somebody in, everybody has to be in agreement and those types of things, but it is who's going to make us better around the table. So we look to that as well.
I want to give some value to someone. I think the program I'm starting, the MLDC, is all about trying to help people, right, turn themselves and their culture towards greater flourishing, greater health. It seems like when you came into Coppell, it was already on a trajectory of being mindful of culture, which is what a huge blessing.
Right.
But for those that right now are listening to this and that's not the case, they're in a situation where they're going, man, this is not a healthy culture. What insights would you give them? How do they start? What should they do to take the initial first steps to start? And because I think you said something important earlier, you can't just whiplash it. You can't just write, let's just all, do 10,000 things at once. What would you say after your tenure of going, here's kind of, if you had to start over, if you had to take a position tomorrow in a city that wasn't healthy, what would be some first steps you might take?
Well, I'm going to use the Coppell model because it worked, but it worked for Coppell. And that was a recognition that, first of all, the culture is not healthy. And so why isn't it healthy, right? And so using Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team as an example, as far as some analysis, you got to do some analysis. So one of the things that I didn't mention that we consistently do on a regular basis is organizational needs inventory. And so we talk about, with all our employees, they all participate at some level in an analysis of, give us an assessment of where we are from a leadership and communication standpoint, and for a healthy organization. And here's where we are, and here's where you'd like us to be, right? And so I would say that would be a good way to start in terms of, where do your employees, where do your team members think you are, and what aspirations do they have and where they would like to be. With that in mind, you'd be able to take that to your leadership team and say, okay, here's the gaps. And so what are we going to do to try to address the gaps? So that's on an organization-wide level. At an individual level, this idea of personal leadership and effective leadership, what are you doing that's contributing to the strengths of the organization? What are you doing that's taking away from the organization? And having those kind of conversations. And then are you able to see where we're trying to go? If you are, great. These are going to be the expectations that we're going to have for ourselves as we move forward. And when we don't meet those expectations, we'll be able to have the discussion about that as well. If you don't want to abide by these expectations, let's have that conversation now, because it's the bad apple kind of routine, right? Everybody's going to see, well, around the table, you got 9 out of 10, they're all going in the same direction. The one's not, but you're not dealing with it. And if you're not dealing with it, it's having an impact on the organization, right? And so you've got to step up as a leader and understand that once you set those expectations, not only do you have to hold yourself to them, but you've got to hold your team to them. And that starts to demonstrate progress. Yes. Those are the places I would start.
And right in line with that, maybe you just said it, but to expand on it, you mentioned kind of one of the themes in your life is just resilience and kind of persistence. What do you think are some of the objections or the problems people will have as they try to change culture that maybe they can be aware of, and maybe how would they prepare for that, specifically in a municipal context?
Yeah, I would say one of the traps is someone being a high level, highly skilled, performing, producing, right, in terms of what's going on. And in their wake, though, is a complete mess. And so the trap is, well, I'm getting the production, my metrics, my KPIs are all being met. I've got green across the board in that particular department. But underneath the surface, it is a complete disaster. And the reason why I call it a trap, because that complete disaster will eventually start showing up, and greens will become yellows and yellows will become reds. The first thing is a recognition of what is the expectation in terms of service to each other, and how do you support each other? And if you have people who are recording everything that gets said on a daily basis and by who and at what time and everything along those lines, just to, CYA, I guess, then you've got a little bit of a fatal flaw in your expectations, because not being critical of someone who does that, but to what end, right? And so that's a trap I would watch out for. Another is from an internal standpoint, are you collaborating amongst your departments, or are you still allowing them to be completely independent? And the best way that you can measure that or see that is, how do you do your budget? If your budget is each department on its own, individually working its own system, doing its own thing, without collaborating with the other departments, that may be a contributor to one of the things that you have to watch out for. What we do, just as an example, is we have a history of 5-year planning. We've been doing it for well over 30 years, 5-year forecasting. It's evolved over time to the point now that when a 5-year forecast starts its process, all the assistant directors come together and they talk about what each of the other departments' needs are. And then they start prioritizing them together about what those particular needs are. And then together, through that prioritization, they put together the 5-year forecast, which then eventually gets communicated to the directors. And we get to have the conversation. So the point is, it's developed by the organization. It's not developed by the directors. Wow. And the directors had to cede, if you will, their responsibility, delegate, and be trusting enough of the organization. And we've been fortunate that that's worked for us really well in hard times as well as good times. So it's survived the times that are outside influences on us, and it survived when we've been really strong as well. So it's been a good way for us to work. So those are things, those are signs, those are ways of identifying and then overcoming some of the challenges.
I think that's one of the real tests of a healthy and flourishing culture is, can it survive a bad time? Can it survive when all of a sudden you have to it's easy to kind of have your vision statement and your cornerstone, right? When everything's sunny and the budget's good. But when you face chaos, that's when, are you actually going to use that as a route and the way we're going to operate? Or are you just going to book of judges, right? Each to their own accord kind of thing. So
I'll give you a specific example of that, Seth. In 2019, the comptroller proposed a rule that would really damage our revenues from sales tax. And so we're in the middle of, the first 3 months of a fiscal year. The rule was going to go into effect in April. And for that year, it was going to have an impact of about $6 million in reduced revenues, which at the time would have been about 10% of our general fund revenues. Overall, it was going to end up being more. And we've been fighting that rule. But so I got a copy of the rule on a Monday, kind of in my head, kind of figured out what we needed to be able to, what our target was, called our directors together on Tuesday and said, by Thursday, let's sit down and, or the next week, let's sit down. You have a goal, and it's to identify about $6 million worth of reductions in our budget. I did not say we were doing it across the board. I did not say this is how to do it. I just kind of showed them how it worked and how I came up with the number that I did. When we came together, everybody kind of talked about their particular areas, and Seth, without me knowing each one of their numbers and everything along those lines, they met the goal of the $6 million reduction and how they were going to do it. And we have been operating as if that rule has been in place ever since. So my point being is, when you find out that you're getting hit on those kind of revenues and you've got to reduce your expenditures, that's a tough time, right?
Yeah. Because
everybody wants to protect their territory. But they all came together and said, well, we're in this together. This is what we're going to do. The interesting thing about that real quickly is, so that happened in December of 2019. So we put that plan into place, and then COVID hit, February, March. And so while everybody else was going crazy in terms of what are we going to do and all this kind of stuff, we were like, we got this. We've already done it. Uh, and the council was like, what are you going to do? And we've already done it. I mean, we've already, and we told the council along the way, and they, it made their life that much easier. Right. Mm-hmm. Which at the end of the day, that's who I need to make sure is in a good place is my city council.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, again, we don't have time to go into it, but you said, a healthy culture allows you to really think 5 years out. But,
right.
I was on your website and you have Vision 2040, like you're thinking 15 years out. And I love that. I'll just mention it. The pillar one is perpetuate a learning environment. You have a laboratory of learning. I just think, again, learning, it's not that there's something magical about books and making time to read. It's the humility to say, I haven't learned everything. And it's the ability to continue to pour things in so that, again, you can self-assess, you can assess the organization and really try to look with fresh eyes to go, how can we better ourselves? Because again, it comes back to your mission. If your real mission is to be a service to a community, you want to become better at that. You want to be more efficient. You want to be more creative. And so I just think that's awesome.
Yeah. We say, we only exist to serve the person in the house. That is the only reason that we exist. And so with that understanding, knowing that we're in service to others, it makes our decision-making that much more straightforward.
I want to be sensitive to your time. I want to, though, make sure that we mention you're the president-elect of the ICMA. You got to tell us what in the world is that? We're going to build a replica White House down in Coppell? What does that mean? What does that entail?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's basically 2 months into it, right? Because I just started in September, and right now our focus is on the hiring of a new executive director. So that's taking up quite a bit of our time. We have a smaller subcommittee of the board that's going through that process, and there's some former board members on that as well. The target for that is to be finished with the interview process this January of 2025. So hopefully we'll be successful in meeting that milestone. Another area that I'm working on with members of the board and other volunteer members in the profession is the governance committee, taking a look at the structure of the board, the regions, the election process. So we're doing a holistic, there was a phase 1 that provided kind of a guideline for us for phase 2. And so we're just getting started into that right now. In the coming year, the primary purpose, as I told the board during the interview process, the coming year, my mission's been set out in front of me, and that's introducing a new executive director to the rest of ICMA and to the membership. We know that it's time to update our strategic plan. So ICMA's plan was last adopted, I think, 2016 or so, 16 or 17. So it's coming up. It takes time to do that. And then the work that we're doing on governance, because there'll probably be some recommendations that are going to impact the constitution of ICMA. And so getting that word out and knowing what we're doing there. So in a way, much of my work's already set out in front of me, and it's a matter of just getting out there and promoting the profession, promoting our professionals that are in this profession and supporting them, making sure they're getting the resources they need to be successul.
How you manage all of that and run a city, I'm not sure how, but the skill of juggling.
Well, that's what I've got 2 great deputy city managers. So delegation is important.
There you go. There you go. Well, man, we could talk. I'd love to have you on again and even dive into the ICMA and the importance of institutional learning, the importance of a community. I think, something that's in the pastoral world, there's a pretty tight community. Pastors it can be pretty tight together. I was an orchestral conductor before that. And in the orchestral conductor community, it's the polar opposite, because there are few jobs and you're all kind of fighting against each other to get those. In fact, my mentor, Harold Faberman, famed conductor in New York, said specifically he was really hard on us. And hard on us is like it was chaos. Like he treated us really intensely. And he said he did that because he wanted to bind us together, because there was such individual conductors live such individual lives. And
Right.
and I think there might be something there. Maybe that's why I resonate with city managers, is because I think so many of them can feel so alone and feel like only I'm, everyone else has a great job and great budgets. And only I have these problems with my council and with my department heads. And I think that's why the MLDC, it's more than just a learning environment. It's really a supportive environment to make sure that you're healthy personally so that you can thrive professionally.
Absolutely.
And it seems like, I hope that organizations like the ICMA, I had a couple acquaintances go to the conference you just had in Pittsburgh, and they just came away man, it was so awesome. It was so good to be with people. And how can we do that in smaller locations as well?
Right.
The states have associations, but how can we just continue to offer that support and encouragement to people who play such a vital role? And like I say, it's the municipal tightrope. You're fighting the three-headed snake of city council, community members, right? Department heads at times. And part of that is like what we had you on. I wanted to, like, culture's so important. If you can feel like, man, the team behind me is flourishing and thriving, and we want to have significant impact, it makes your job so much easier.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah.
It is a calling, just as you talked about the mission work. I believe that to be true. When you choose this, it is a calling. If you're doing it for other reasons, it makes that much more difficult.
I love it. Well, I won't be sensitive to your time. Mike, thank you for joining the HaltingWinter podcast. Thanks for spending your time with us and sharing your story. What an amazing story. It's funny, back to the bread truck, a pastor of mine often said, in pastoral work, it can be so people-centered and so demanding and so tiring every Monday after Sunday, which is kind of the Super Bowl, right?
Right.
Sunday is the day you expend everything. He goes, on Monday, he called it Bread Truck Monday. And he goes, sometimes I just want to have a bread truck job and just deliver bread. And so when you said that this morning, I thought Bread Truck Monday. Sometimes I'm sure city managers.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, I may pick up on that.
There it is. Oh, thanks for joining us in the HaltingWinter podcast. The stories we share here on the HaltingWinter podcast are part of something bigger, a movement to remind us where government truly lives. No, not in Washington, D.C., but right here at home, where we live, where we work, and where we play. Because it's in our cities, our counties, and our communities that the real work of democracy happens. And when local government thrives, people thrive. If this conversation inspired you, take a small step that makes a big difference. Subscribe to the podcast, share the episode, and follow along on social media. Every click helps amplify the stories that build pride, purpose, and belonging in local government. To learn more about the HaltingWinter Project and how you can be part of the work that builds belonging, visit HaltingWinter.com. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and until next time, this has been the HaltingWinter Podcast.